I got into glass years ago? I was at the time doing a lot of 3D printing art, using a 3D printer to create fine art. And I had the idea that I wanted to incorporate glass elements into 3D sculptures. And I was told that there was a professor at JU named Brian Fruce. He ran the glass department at Jacksonville University. And I went and met with him, and I said, you know, I have this idea about da-da-da, including these pieces. And he goes, well, we have a glass demo series that allows outside people to come into JU and, you know, make your own glass. He says you might be interested in that. I did not realize that he was a crack dealer. I started to blow glass. I started to get into glass, and I was hooked. And he's still helped me tremendously. And then I was just ever since I started, you know, blowing glass and getting into glass and glass making, I've just taken off in that direction. I've always found it interesting about how all of our creative paths, you know, people may say, oh my gosh, you're doing that now? And Tom will tell you this, and he goes, I've been interested in this for a long time. It's paths, our creative paths always zigzag. We never know exactly where we're going. Yeah. We're just following some path. And one thing leads you to the next.
We're following the muse. And you've talked about the muse before, yeah.
Yeah, I've talked about how our environment is the muse. You know, the muse that inspires us.
Tell us a little bit specifically about your double exposures and how you arrived at that technique.
So, I've always been interested in double exposures. It's a technique that goes back to the 19th century. And I remember Paul Karabinas in our photography class in the 1980s talked about how during that time people would use double exposures to try to capture the spirit of someone. Mm-hmm. So it had this kind of mystical quality. So at that time I was doing double exposures on film cameras and liked it as a technique, but the problem was you couldn't really preview what you were shooting. It was a real hit and miss technique, and you hoped you got something interesting on the second exposure, but when digital cameras came into being, that all changed, and it's made it a lot easier because now you can actually preview what you're seeing. When you shoot a double exposure, you're kind of changing the narrative from capturing a moment to creating a piece of fine art.
Why is the title of the exhibit Exalted Shores?
So that name is an ancient Hebrew word which means to lift up, to honor, and to hold in high regard. And I think for me personally, and I know Clint believes this as well, we need to think of that same idea for our coastal environments. We need to hold them in high regard, and we need to honor them because that's going to protect them for future generations.
And, you know, also, Tom and I are very inspired by the color, the light. Mm-hmm. We are both very outdoors people. We spend a lot of time on the beach. We spend a lot of time on the water. We are very inspired by the environment that we live and work in.
Yeah, and that environment is constantly changing, the light and all that, and I think that is something that just continues to inspire us on a daily basis.
Very much light. Mm-hmm. Tom gets up super early to go out and take pictures of the sun and the way it affects the beach in the morning and at night, and so he's very tied into the changing light. I work in glass, and glass is all about light. Light reflecting off of it, light going through it, So light is super important to working in glass, and it's super important to obviously photography and video.
Yeah, and I think the other thing about glass that I have found just in this whole process of working on the show is how color plays such an important part in your work.
Yeah.
This idea that, you know, the color that you see in one of your pieces, there's layers of color. And for me, that I also see that same layering of color in some of the environments around here, in the way you see a marsh and all the different colors of grasses and all
Yeah,
that.
and I think that we both appreciate the subtleties in the colors in our environment, and we're both trying to communicate that in our work.
Yeah.